appreciate your presence here with them this afternoon, which offers them a great deal of comfort and support. Adonai ma'adam v'teda'ehu ben enosh v'chashvehu. O Lord, what are we that you have regard for us? What are we that you are mindful of us? We are like a breath, our days are as a passing shadow. We come and we go like grass, which in the morning shoots up renewed, in the evening it fades and it withers. You cause us to turn to dust, saying, return, you mortal creatures. Would that we were wise, that we understood whither we are going. For when we die, we carry nothing away, our glory does not accompany us. Mark the wholehearted and behold the upright. They shall have peace. Let us join together now in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Esa'ena el heharim me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift mine eyes unto the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. God, your protector, will not slumber. Yea, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian, God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm. God will guard your soul, your going and your coming, now and forever. Kohelet, the author of the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, reminds us that for everything there is a season, a time for every experience under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. And DesRosiers died early this past Sunday morning at the age of 79. She lived a long and a remarkably eventful life, and she maintained through sheer will some of her most passionate involvements right to the very end. We feel the weight of her loss, and we miss her. She impacted the lives of those who knew her, as well as the communities and organizations of which she was so integral a part. Anne was born in Bradford, Pennsylvania. At the age of 8, she contracted polio and spent the better part of her 9th year, that is more than 10% of her childhood up to that point, in a hospital in Buffalo. When she was 15, she and her family moved to Florida, where she graduated from the Dan McCarty High School. She then matriculated at the University of Florida, majoring in English and psychology, and graduated in 1960. When she was 21, she married Roger DesRosiers and moved to Champaign-Urbana, where Roger was a graduate student at the University of Illinois. Thereafter, Anne and Roger settled in several university towns as he pursued his career. During these years, Anne pursued her own education and became involved in the life of her communities. While, for example, they were in Salt Lake City, Utah, both Anne and Roger engaged deeply in the Jewish life of the community. Anne herself became active in the B'nai B'rith organization and served as its president. In addition, she spearheaded her synagogue's fundraising drive in order to build a new synagogue building. Anne's devotion to and involvement in Judaism and Jewish life was a constant throughout her life. And as early as her years in St. Louis in the 1970s, Anne began cultivating her career as a development director. She came to Cleveland when Roger became president of the Cleveland Art Museum. During the next few years, she served as a management consultant for arts institutions in Cleveland, most especially for the Great Lakes Theater. Eventually, Anne was offered the position of managing director for that company, a position that she held for more than 5 years until she retired in the late 1990s. During the years of her involvement with Great Lakes, Anne mounted the campaign to move the company from the Lakewood High School to Playhouse Square. But retirement for Anne DesRosiers did not mean slowing down. During the subsequent years, Anne was recruited for 4 important positions: for the Cleveland Cultural Coalition, for the Arts and Culture Program at the Mandel Jewish Community Center, as manager for the career of the jazz singer Helen Welch, and as the interim managing director of the Cleveland Playhouse. In other words, Anne DesRosiers had a long, distinguished, and varied career in development, and especially as a pioneer in the arts management field. And we will hear more about this shortly. What about Anne's personal qualities? When I met with her brother, Brad, her daughters, Diana and Berinthia, and her partner of more than 20 years, Steve, yesterday afternoon, I asked them to describe Anne to me. Thereupon, the adjectives literally poured forth from them. Anne was, they said, strong-willed, stubborn, impatient, dedicated, tenacious, direct, brilliant, curious, engaged, and generous. She loved to cook, and she loved to cook for others. One example of this: over the years, Anne befriended several tenants in her apartment building, and she regularly cooked for several of them, especially for the elderly. And she continued doing this, one of her favorite activities, right up to the end, reluctant as she was to give it up until her illness overcame her. In addition, Anne loved sports, and she rooted for the Cavs, the Miami Dolphins, and the Indians. Now, rooted for does not quite capture her involvement. Passionately engaged, yelling at her team and at the television. These would be more accurate descriptions. Anne loved to travel, and she and Steve traveled extensively over the years. Let's let a description of one of their trips represent the whole of them, as well as Anne's approach to life itself. It seems that back in 2014, Anne discovered one day that the airlines were about to raise the mileage requirements for subsequent travel. So she immediately got busy planning a 7.5-week around-the-world trip. That trip, which she meticulously researched and planned in just 8 days, took them to 14 countries and 36 airports. including a 25-hour flight from Europe to South America. When I asked Steve how many glitches the two of them faced during this hastily planned trip, he turned to me and said, 0. I myself got to know Anne over the past several years. She came regularly to our high holiday services, and she sat in the same seat every year. We socialized from time to time and saw each other at cultural events. Now, when Anne learned that the therapies she was undergoing were not working and that her death was now imminent, she called me and asked me to come over to spend some time with her and Steve. She had prepared a delicious meal for Steve and me, for which she could not join us because of her growing weakness. But before Steve and I sat down to eat, the three of us talked. And during that conversation, I quietly marveled at her realistic, no-nonsense assessment of her situation, her clarity of mind and purpose, and her inner strength. She led us through a discussion of many related topics: her life, her prospects, her funeral, and those she was about to leave behind. She had, she said, and she said this without sentimentality, without exaggeration, without bravado. She had lived a wonderful life, and she had no regrets. She mentioned the individuals she wanted to offer eulogies at her funeral, and she had many questions for me about the funeral, about the burial, and about the aftermath. And as she questioned and as she spoke, I could see some of those remarkable qualities that her family and I had discussed yesterday afternoon. I witnessed her inner strength and her determination. I saw her curiosity and her insistence on facing what was ahead. I observed her desire to retain as much control as she could, and I observed her generosity of spirit, her love for Steve, and for her family. Anne DesRosiers, in short, remained the impressive person she always had been, no more so than under the duress of her devastating illness and the reality of what lay ahead. I felt blessed to have had those moments with her, and I, like you, will never forget her. Zichrona livracha. The memory of Anne DesRosiers will always be our blessing. Amen. I now want to call on three individuals who will reflect on the life, the qualities, the accomplishments of Anne DesRosiers. First, her friend and former board president of the Great Lakes Theater, Michael Peterman.
What is a friend? Webster has several definitions, with the two most relevant ones being one who is attached to another by affection or esteem, and the second of which is a favored companion. Anne DesRosiers met both of those definitions, not only for me, but I suspect for nearly everyone she ever encountered in her multifaceted and productive life. My relationship with Anne covered three distinct stages. I first met her in 1992 when I was invited to join the Board of Trustees of what was then called Great Lakes Theater Festival. The renowned Jerry Friedman was our artistic director, Mary Bills served as our managing director, and Anne was an outside consultant who had been engaged to find the balance between the desires of the artistic team and the practical realities of satisfying those desires through a combination of philanthropic and earned revenue sources. When I joined the Great Lakes Board, I only knew 2 of the board members, and I felt somewhat lost in what for me was a new world of professional regional theater. It was then that Anne, as she did with so many others during her illustrious career, took me under her wing and provided me over the next 3 years with the equivalent of a master's degree in regional theater. By 1995, I had become, to my surprise, the president of the board, with Anne at my side as our new managing director, as she had replaced Mary Bill, who had recently retired. As many of you may remember, the mid-90s were difficult times for nonprofit cultural arts organizations in Cleveland, and some of our peers had ceased to exist. However, guided by Anne's vision, the remarkable support of many of our incredible trustees, and the indulgences provided by the philanthropic community and our landlord Playhouse Square, Great Lakes was able to survive. The foundation she built allowed us to march down a path which ultimately led from the Ohio Theater to the artistic acclaim and financial stability we now enjoy in our new home in the Hannah Theater under the leadership of Charlie Fee and Bob Taylor. I was not the only one, though, who benefited greatly from an association with Anne. Over the past several months, Anne received dozens of cards and letters from legions of her well-wishers, who she also coached and mentored over the years. She shared many of them with me, and I've excerpted some of them to read to you today. So as not to embarrass them, I won't disclose their identities, but they represent Anne's groupies, who she trained, inspired, and sent on their way to their own successful careers. Not surprisingly, the themes and descriptions which were included in their heartfelt notes included the following verbatim statements: stunning woman, sparkling eyes, glowing smile, keen intelligence, sharp wit, good taste, nurturer of women in the arts. You made me feel so supported and valued at a time that I truly needed that validation. Please know how much you are cherished in this community, how deeply valued your legacy is, how many lives have been touched by your grace, and how much you are loved. Another expressed her gratitude to Anne for her inspired brainstorming, creative solutions, for team meals, gatherings, and warm visits to her home, and for her leadership, encouragement, and mentorship. Finally, one of her proteges wrote, and I quote, "I thought about your strength. Years and years at Great Lakes, and your determination and strength only grew. Challenges never slowed you, but rather they made you more capable, more powerful, more amazing. You were a light of passion and grit in my life and career." He continued with the following: "Thank you for being a strong woman in a man's world and for never being shy about it. Thank you for your professionalism at all times and the shining light of your true compassion. Thank you for loving theater so much and for deepening my love for it too. To all of those glowing and well-deserved compliments, I say amen." Fortunately for me, the conclusion of my leadership days at Great Lakes led to the second stage of my relationship with Anne. While we continued to get together for lunch at least once a month, I had the opportunity to work with her again beginning in 2004 when the board chair of the Jewish Community Center, which had recently closed its long-running Halley Theater, asked me to chair a task force to see how we could revitalize arts and culture and the programming for the J. I asked Anne to join the task force, and with the approval of the J's board, its president Michael Hyman, and the generosity of a local philanthropist, the J rebuilt its arts programming under the leadership of Ann, several of her former Great Lakes colleagues who she recruited, and other well-known Cleveland artists. Ann caused this phoenix to rise from the ashes, and as she had done years before with Great Lakes, set the JCC's arts and culture programming into the future with a new vision and a mission to delight Cleveland audiences. The final stage of our relationship over the past 10 years included the continuation of our monthly lunches, where we talked about our mutual interests in movies, sports, blackjack, and travel. As most of you know, and as the rabbi mentioned, Ann and Steve Kadish traveled all over the world, and I enjoyed hearing about her pre-planning before each journey and her debriefs upon their return. We also had a common interest in dining out and shared our experiences with new restaurants in Cleveland. If you've dined out with Ann, you know that she was very particular about how her food was to be prepared and which ingredients were to be added or deleted. Our running joke was that she would order soup extra, extra, extra hot, and when it was my turn to order, I would respond as Meg Ryan did in When Harry Met Sally with, "I'll have what she's having." These last 8 months with Ann were a unique experience for me. Although I've been fortunate to have few family members or friends with a terminal illness, I was constantly awed by her courage, generally calm demeanor, and highly focused organizational skills in dealing with her illness, while at the same time settling her financial affairs and pre-planning her funeral. In these last months, she also afforded me the opportunity to share the experience of observing the total eclipse of the sun with her at Bratnall Place, and very specially to meet her brother Brad, her daughters Diana and Berinthia, all of whom she adored and who bolstered her spirits with their visits. My wife, Barbara, often says that friends are the family you choose. Ann, you were the sister I never had. My interactions with you over the past 25 years have been a highlight of my life, have made me a better man, and for that I will be forever grateful. God bless you. Rest in peace, my friend.
Now I want to call on Bill Rudman, Ann's colleague and friend.
Well, I have never known anyone who saw life more clearly than Ann DesRosiers. Clarity was, as she would say, one of her core values. Same for living without illusions. You always knew that for better or worse, she would tell you exactly what she thought. Her mastery of language allowed her to be diplomatic about it, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. Not anything. She spoke the truth as she knew it. Here is a small but telling example. I'm going to build on the story that Michael just told and be even more candid. I bet anyone here who dined out with Ann had the experience at least once of watching her send back an entree she wasn't satisfied with. That could sometimes be embarrassing for her companion, me, but my embarrassment took a back seat to the admiration I felt for her candor. She could be difficult and demanding, and she knew it. In some ways, she wore it as a badge of honor. But that's because she believed in pushing everyone to achieve his or her full potential, especially herself, which made her a wonderful leader. I first met Anne in 1982. We were both doing a lot of consulting for arts organizations then, and we wound up speaking back-to-back at a conference in Atlanta. Two of our fellow consultants, George Thorne and Nello McDaniel, knew what they were doing when they cast us at that conference. I was an arts marketing and PR guy at that time. Anne was in development and fundraising and had a national reputation for her work at the Repertory Theater of St. Louis and the St. Louis Zoo. We were coming from two seemingly different perspectives on the arts, but at the conference we basically said the same thing. And at that time, our message was very progressive in the field and even, I would say, kind of stunning. We immediately formed a mutual admiration society, and for years we promised that we were going to write a book together. Time got in the way of that, but it would have been a really good book. I worked at Great Lakes Theater for about 100 years. So I watched as Anne's role got larger and larger. At first it had to be limited because her home was in St. Louis. But once she and Roger moved to Cleveland in 1989, she began spending more time with us. And that was our good fortune. As Mike said, we were already blessed with a famous artistic director, Gerald Friedman, but Great Lakes was still adjusting to its 1982 move from suburban Lakewood to the big city of Playhouse Square in Cleveland. As Anne's dear friend Natalie Epstein, a key festival trustee, would tell you, our theater faced daunting challenges. In 1993, Anne succeeded Mary Bill as managing director, as you've heard. To use corporate parlance, that made Anne the CEO. She did what she already knew how to do well, work with trustees to raise a lot of money. But she also wanted to learn everything she could about best practices in top management, particularly about strategic planning, which we all did at the feet of trustee Tony Lang, who was then the planning guru at Taylor Hauser. I think the process in many ways reinvented Great Lakes Theater because Anne's crusade was to lead our theater in growing up, and she was very proud of this, using concepts and practices from the for-profit world that could be applied to the nonprofit world. I remember one staff retreat where she gave us all copies of Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Required reading from Anne DesRosiers. I know this must all sound rather academic, but believe me when I say that in the real life of that theater, it was exhilarating. And you know what her favorite phrase was during those days? Some of you know this. It was paradigm shift. It was all about paradigm shift for Anne. So she wanted to learn on the job, and as a management team, we all learned from her. Our youngest staff member, the 20-something Xandra Wolfgram, wrote this on Sunday. Anne was a role model for me, a female executive who, by her example, showed me the kind of career I could have. My colleague Nello McDaniel, who runs a national arts consulting firm and worked with Anne on many projects over the years, recalled on Sunday that some years ago, her analysis of a television commercial proved to be a revelation for him. I learned that the most important thing in the arts is to instill a sense of trust, he said. When trust is established, a relationship can follow. And when there is a true relationship, anything is possible. It was an aha moment that told me to step back and see the bigger picture. Anne was always about the bigger picture. She never became distracted by simple, shiny components. Also on Sunday, my Great Lakes colleague Ken McLaughlin mentioned her quote-unquote legacy. And I really like that word because it is so accurate. Lots of us, including Zandra and Ken and Tony Foreman and Margaret Lynch, many of whom later built their careers outside of Cleveland, all of us had so much to give to our communities thanks to the values that Anne embodied. I remember something she said over and over again. She used to say, "We have to find another way. That solution has no integrity." And whatever she said, she never ever raised her voice in saying it, which I still find rather incredible, except as I just learned a few moments ago when she was yelling at sports teams on the television. Until I worked side by side with Anne at Great Lakes, I somehow believed that all a theater really needed was a strong artistic vision plus a well-qualified staff to support it. I learned from Anne that a management vision is nearly as important as an artistic one. And I mean vision with a capital V. Anne herself was a beautiful vision, wasn't she? I can see her shining green-blue eyes, her tanned face, and her flashing smile. As we say in the theater, she had real stage presence. Besides which, the fact is that Anne was, and you've heard this word too this afternoon, she was brilliant. And that's a word that makes me smile, and I want to tell you why. When she and I had big picture conversations about Great Lakes Theater, the exchange was always punctuated by my telling her that some idea of hers was brilliant, and her doing the same with me. Of course, in the brilliance department, compared with Anne, I was Tweety Bird and she was King Kong. 2 months ago, when she was already very sick, she asked me to come to Brattenall Place to meet with another of her close friends, Karen Spiro, who had been charged with developing a strategic plan for her condo association. By her own admission, Karen didn't know anything about strategic planning. So, Anne and I gave her a 1-hour tutorial. And for that 1 hour, the light came back in her eyes, and her speech became passionate as we talked about principles that we lived by. And you know what? The word brilliant kept getting tossed back and forth, just as it had in the old days. We were both at the top of our game, and we knew it. And yet, her brilliance never got in the way of her collaborations. A conversation with Anne was about solving a problem together quietly, methodically, step by step, taking as much time as necessary to get where we wanted to go. In April, soon after she had been diagnosed, she asked me to write her full narrative obituary. It's on the sheet of paper that you found on the table outside. And I have to tell you, this exercise of working on her obituary, it was vintage Anne. Like me, Anne was a perfectionist, so she was not satisfied until she had done 5 edits of my 5 drafts over a period of more than a month. So when you have a chance to read this, you should know that every word on that piece of paper met her standards. And along the way, I learned some fascinating new things in writing it. Of course, I knew about the pride she took in working at Great Lakes, and working in St. Louis, and working in Cleveland for the J, and consulting for more than 200 nonprofit organizations all over the country, not just in the arts, but in education and religion and social services too. What I didn't know was, I didn't know about her work in the 1970s as a member of the congregation at Temple Kol Ami in Salt Lake City. At the temple, her work focused on raising the profile of women within the congregation. And get this, she also told me about bringing cultural and even culinary diversity to Salt Lake City, and that included previously unknown bagels and challah. Anne was not by nature sentimental, with the exception of one thing that I remember quite clearly. Although she was an exemplary member of the Jewish community wherever she lived, believe it or not, she had this thing about Christmas carols. She loved them as much as I did. I was raised a Methodist, and I could sing 2 full verses of every carol. But at staff holiday parties, Anne could always sing the words to 4 or even 5 verses of those carols. Margaret Lynch, my Catholic colleague at Great Lakes, agrees this was staggering to witness. Don't ask me how Anne did it. Let's just say she had a terrific interfaith sensibility. The last chapter of my work with Anne was 20 years ago. I wanted to form my own nonprofit, an arts education organization devoted to musical theater. Initially, as many of you know, the state of Ohio requires that you do that with 3 trustees. So I named myself, I named a business consultant friend of mine, and I named Anne DesRosiers. The fact that the musical theater project is thriving 20 years later says a lot about the groundwork that we laid together. I felt privileged to be on her resume. But even when we no longer collaborated, we remained in close touch. She delighted in telling me about her spectacular travels with Steve, and she was always amused by and had strong opinions about my romantic life. I have to admit, she was usually right. Just one more thing. Anne, to her credit, could be as tough as they come. But she also had a huge heart. There were many times when, in a matter of seconds, I watched her go from steely-eyed determination to tears in her eyes. It seems to me that that is the very essence, the paradigm of an arts manager, a great arts manager. And more important, it's the very essence of a great human being.
Now I want to call on Anne's brother, Brad.
I have had the pleasure to meet some of you, many I have not. I'm Brad Book, and for all of my life, I have had the great good fortune to be Anne's baby brother. And please know that she reminded me about the baby part of that designation in every letter and in every email that she ever sent, which she always signed off with the acronym YOS. YOS, your older sister. I promise, were she to introduce me to any of you today, it would be, please meet my baby brother, Brad. Never mind, he's now 68 years old. Never mind. On behalf of our sister, Brenda, who could not be here today, and her family, on behalf of Anne's daughters, Diana and Berinthia, who are here today, and their children, and on behalf of all of the extended family of Benny and Twyla Book, our parents. I thank you. I thank you very much for being a part of Anne's life and for being with us here today to celebrate it. Others have talked about Anne's qualities as a friend and as a business person and as a force in the communities, the many communities in which she was involved. And I would have to say that what you saw is what we got as a family from Anne. Anne lived her family life very much as she lived her public life. It probably won't surprise any of you to know that Anne really wasn't one to let her hair down or to put her feet up when she got home at the end of a long work day or week. It is a virtual certainty, I think, that the word downtime did not appear in the official lexicon of Anne DesRosiers' life. She was always doing something. Anne was not just doing it, but doing it intensely, doing it passionately. She was completely engaged in everything she did. Our family theory is that at some point early in Anne's life, somebody put a piece of duct tape over the on-off switch while it was in the on position, and there it remained for as long as any of us know. And as has been said, everything she did had to be done perfectly. Whether it was cooking or cleaning or traveling. I've heard a little bit about the yelling at the TV. I want you to understand she was simply trying to help the referees and the umpires make the right calls. That was her only purpose. I believe that Anne believed that she could overcome anything, simply by the sheer force of her will. A big part of that, I think, is that as a child, she did overcome a disease that had crippled tens of thousands of children in the 1940s. She survived childhood polio. She beat a disease that was not well understood and that was primitively treated at that time. But she survived. She won that battle. That polio left Anne with a very significant physical handicap. But I think it also became a source of her power. She figured that if she could survive the disease itself, then she certainly wasn't going to let a weak left leg and a limp keep her from getting to the places in life where she wanted to go. So, from as far back as anyone can remember, Anne demanded a high level of performance from herself. She set high expectations for herself. She refused to make excuses for herself or for her own performance. And that is largely how she made Anne DesRosiers into the remarkably talented and remarkably productive human being who did so much for so many, for so long. She set the bar higher than she could reach, and then she reached it. She believed there was no obstacle that she could not overcome. But, as in all things, there is a yin and there is a yang. Anne demanded of others what she demanded of herself. Anne's demands on her family were often as difficult and maybe even at times as unreasonable as were her demands on those she worked with on all of the projects that you have heard about. Anne's expectations for the performance of her loved ones were every bit as high as were her expectations for herself. And Anne was just as willing to criticize and to express disappointment with her loved ones as she was to criticize herself or her colleagues when a project did not get done according to her plan. Anne did not leave her public persona in her office desk drawer when she left in the afternoon. I think she just hit the pause button until she got home. Then she hit play and picked right back up where she had left off. So I can say with love in my heart that it wasn't always easy to be a part of Anne's family, because she was a fighter, because she fought for what she believed in, because as a child she learned to fight for her life. And one thing I am certain, Anne's example was a lesson to her daughters. Those lessons were not easy, but the passing years have shown that those lessons were well learned. Diana and Berinthia have become fighters in their own right. And Anne was as smart about herself as she was about others. She had a clear self-awareness about her family relationships and about her impact on her family. She knew very well that her commitment to perfection in all things had a price. She knew very well that she was not the easiest sibling or mother or wife or partner or grandmother to get along with. And that troubled her. It troubled her. Probably more deeply than any of us will ever know, because Anne did not wear her heart on her sleeve. But just days before Anne's death, when gathering her thoughts was a great struggle for her, when it took all of the energy she could muster, Anne sat with Diana and Berinthia and me, and she talked about regrets. She talked about family things, about personal things, about relationships, about things that she wished had been different. She talked about the importance of family and about what it meant to her. She did not pretend. She did not make believe about others or about herself. Anne DesRosiers remained a perfectionist to the very end, but a perfectionist who was very well aware of her own imperfections. Let me close by sharing a note I got yesterday from a man that I practice law with in Wyoming. Of Anne, he said, "She certainly lived life in a full and omnivorous way. A bright, curious, and undaunted woman, not satisfied with chatter or superficial things, instead wanting actual conversation about real things." True that. I'm sure there are hundreds of stories to be told. We'd love to hear them. Please join us back at Brattonall Place after we lay Anne to rest. Please share some of those stories with us. Thank you again from all of us to all of you. Thank you for being here to celebrate Anne's life. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure on behalf of all of you, I want to express my deep appreciation to Michael and to Bill and to Brad for those really quite magnificent tributes. You have helped all of us, I'm sure. I know you helped me to understand the richness and the reach and the depth of that really quite remarkable person. Thank you so much. O God of life, amid the ceaseless tides of change which sweep away the generations, your love remains to comfort us and to give us hope. Around us are life and death, decay and renewal, the flowing rhythm that all things obey. Our life is a dance to a song that we cannot hear. Its melody courses through us for a little while, then it seems to cease. Whence the melody and whither does it go? In darkness as in light, we turn to you, the source of life and the answer to all of life's mysteries. Will you please rise for the El Mole Rachamim? El Mole Rachamim shochein bamromim, hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, im kadoshim utahorim kazohar harakia mazhirim, et nishmat Chana bat Binyamin shahacha la'olama, bala rachamim yastirea b'seter kanafav la'olamim, v'yitzror bitzra hachayim et nishmata, Adonai hu nachalata v'tanuach b'shalom al mishkava v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Anne DesRosiers, our loved one who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let her find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. Will you please be seated? I want to reiterate what Brad has just said, that the family of Anne DesRosiers will receive friends in the penthouse of 1 Brattonall immediately after our interment service. Our service will continue now at graveside at the Lakeview Cemetery. Once again, let me thank all of you for being here this afternoon, which has given all of us a great deal of comfort and support.
you.